The diner went silent as 3 thugs tore open the waitress's uniform, laughing like monsters in a cage they thought they owned. But what none of them knew, what every trembling witness was about to learn, is that her husband wasn't just anyone. He was Mateo Marquez, the man once feared as the Black Lion. And the moment that bell above the door chimed, their laughter died. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The coffee pot shattered against the tile floor when the diner went dead silent. Lena Marquez stood frozen near booth 7, clutching the torn fabric of her pale blue uniform against her chest, the cold air biting her exposed skin. The laughter of 3 strangers echoed through the restaurant loud, cruel, and heartless. Customers sat paralyzed in their red vinyl booths, forks hovering mid-air, but no one expected what would happen next. Because that gentle waitress had protection none of them could even imagine, and within the next 10 minutes, those same men who mocked her would understand the true meaning of fear. The autumn sun was setting over Route 9 when Lena began her evening shift at Miller's Diner. At 31, she carried herself with the kind of quiet grace that made people feel safe. Her uniform was always pressed, her dark blonde hair pulled back neatly, and her smile genuine. Regular customers knew her coffee was always hot, her presence always calming. The elderly couple in booth 3 smiled as she refilled their cups without being asked. The trucker in the corner nodded his thanks. To everyone here, she was simply Lena the waitress, who remembered your order and never raised her voice. Yet behind those warm hazel eyes lived a story no one in this small town knew. As she wiped down the counter, the bell above the door chimed. 3 men walked in leather jackets, cocky swagger, voices too loud for the space. The one in front, broad-shouldered with slicked-back dark hair and a smirk carved into his face, scanned the diner like he owned it. Behind him, his 2 friends, one tall and lanky, the other stocky with a faded tattoo creeping up his neck, laughed at nothing, the kind of laughter meant to claim territory. "Yo, sweetheart," the leader called out, snapping his fingers at Lena. "We're starving. You gonna take care of us or what?" Lena grabbed 3 menus, her expression unchanged. "Of course. Right this way, gentlemen." The way she said gentlemen was soft, polite, professional. It made the stocky one snicker. They didn't sit where she led them. They took the center booth instead, spreading out, making themselves unavoidable. Other diners shifted uncomfortably, eyes down, conversations quieting. Old Jimmy, the cook, watched through the kitchen window, his weathered hands pausing over the grill. Lena set the menus down. "Can I start you with coffee?" The leader leaned back, arms spread across the booth. "Depends. You any good at serving?" His friends erupted in laughter. A few customers glanced over, uncomfortable. Lena's voice remained calm. "I'll get your coffee." Over the next 20 minutes, their behavior escalated. They mocked the trucker's worn jacket, made crude jokes about the elderly woman's hearing aid, sent back their burgers twice, once claiming they were cold, then claiming they were too hot. Each time, Lena returned to the kitchen without complaint, remade the order, brought it back with the same gentle smile. "She's either stupid or a saint," the lanky one muttered loud enough for half the diner to hear. The leader grinned. "Let's find out which." When Lena brought their check, placing it gently on the table, the leader's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was tight, fingers pressing into her skin. "You know what?" he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I don't think the service was good enough for a tip." His grip tightened. "Maybe you should try harder to please us." Lena pulled back gently, her voice still steady. "Sir, please let go." He didn't. Instead, he yanked her forward and his other hand caught the collar of her uniform. The fabric tore cleanly down the front seam, buttons scattering across the checkered floor like dropped coins. The diner went silent. The elderly woman gasped. The trucker's chair scraped as he started to rise. Jimmy dropped a spatula in the kitchen. Lena stood there, one hand clutching her torn uniform to her chest, the other still holding the empty coffee pot. Her breathing was shallow, her face flushed. The leader grinned, proud of the chaos he'd created while his friends erupted in laughter that echoed off the walls. Customers watched in stunned horror, frozen between intervening and self-preservation. But Lena didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, looking at the man with a calm that didn't belong in that moment. A calm that came from somewhere deeper than fear, because she knew something they didn't. The bell above the door chimed. Every head turned, and Mateo Marquez stepped inside. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a simple black jacket over a gray shirt. His face was calm, his movements unhurried. He stopped 3 steps inside the door, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the scattered buttons, the torn uniform, his wife's face. The trucker's eyes went wide. He sat back down slowly, hands flat on the table. The elderly man whispered something to his wife, who immediately looked away. Jimmy disappeared from the kitchen window. The 3 men at the booth didn't notice. They were still laughing. Mateo walked forward, each footstep deliberate, and pulled out a chair at the counter. He sat down slowly, never taking his eyes off the men in the center booth. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying through the silence like a church bell. "Lena, come here. If seeing this already has your blood boiling, hit subscribe now. Because if you don't, you'll forget this anger the moment the video ends, and that's exactly how villains win." Lena moved toward Mateo slowly, her hand still clutching the torn fabric of her uniform. The diner remained frozen, every customer holding their breath, watching the quiet man at the counter who had just commanded the room with 2 words. The leader of the 3 men finally looked up, his grin fading as he noticed the shift in atmosphere. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Mateo didn't answer. He simply looked at Lena, his dark eyes scanning her face, the torn uniform, the way her hands trembled slightly despite her calm expression. Something flickered across his face, not rage. Not yet. Something colder, more controlled. "Are you hurt?" His voice was soft, meant only for her. She shook her head. "I'm okay." But they both knew that wasn't the question he was really asking. To understand what happened next, you need to know who Mateo Marquez really was, and why Lena never truly feared men like these. 3 years ago, before the diner, before the quiet life, they lived in a world where power was currency and loyalty was life. Mateo had been the head of the Marquez syndicate, but not the kind of leader who ruled through fear. He built his empire on something rarer: trust. Men followed him because he protected them. Families pledged loyalty because he kept his word. In a world of betrayal and blood, Mateo was the exception. Lena had been a social worker when they met someone who still believed people could change, that kindness mattered. He'd walked into her community center looking for a youth program for one of his soldiers' sons. She'd looked at this dangerous man and seen someone trying to do right by a kid who had no father. 6 months later, she became his wife. Not because of his power, but because beneath the reputation, she'd found a man who still believed in protecting the innocent. Their life together had been complicated, living between 2 worlds, trying to balance his responsibilities with her values. But they'd made it work. Until the night of the ambush, rival families, jealous of Mateo's influence, conspired together. They lured him to a warehouse meeting under the pretense of peace negotiations. 15 men against 3. Gunfire erupted. Flames consumed the building. By the time backup arrived, the warehouse was ash. They found 2 bodies. Mateo's wasn't one of them. For 8 months, the world believed he was dead. Lena mourned him in a grief so deep she couldn't speak. She left the city, left everything, disappeared into numbness. Until one rain-soaked night, there was a knock at her door. She'd opened it to find him scarred, broken, but alive. He'd crawled out of that warehouse, been hidden by an old ally, spent months recovering from burns and bullet wounds. When he could finally stand, he came back to her. They'd sat in her tiny apartment kitchen until dawn, and he'd said the words that changed everything. "I can't go back to that life, but I can't do this without you." So they made a pact. They would disappear together. Take new names, find a quiet place, build something clean. No violence, no power, just peace. The diner had been Lena's idea, a place where people came to feel safe, to be fed, to be seen. It became their sanctuary, their second chance. For 3 years it worked. Back in the present, Mateo stood slowly from the counter stool. The movement was casual, unhurried, but the air in the diner shifted again. He walked toward the center booth, hands in his pockets, his footsteps the only sound in the room. The leader tried to recover his bravado. "Look, man, we were just having some fun with the waitress. No harm done, right?" He glanced at his friends for support, but his friends weren't laughing anymore. The lanky one's eyes kept darting to the door. The stocky one had gone pale. Mateo stopped at their table. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Stand up." The leader hesitated. "What?" I said, "Stand up." Mateo's tone didn't change, still quiet, still calm. but something in it made the man's hands start to shake. The leader stood slowly, trying to maintain eye contact, trying to seem tough. "Listen, we don't want any trouble." "Then you shouldn't have touched her." The trucker in the corner booth suddenly stood, walking quickly to the leader's side. He was a big man, weathered from years on the road, and his face had gone white. He leaned in close to the leader's ear and whispered something urgent. The color drained from the leader's face. His eyes shot to Matteo, then to Lena, then back to Matteo. Recognition crashed over him like ice water. "Oh God," he breathed. You're the Black Lion." The stocky friend knocked over his water glass, standing up. The lanky one was already backing toward the door. Matteo smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Now you're starting to understand." The leader's hands were shaking now, his earlier confidence shattered. "We didn't know we wouldn't have—" "You wouldn't have what?" Matteo stepped closer. "Hurt her? Humiliated her? Torn her clothes in front of a room full of people?" His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire diner. "You did those things because you thought she was weak, that she was alone, that no one would stop you." He glanced back at Lena, still standing by the counter, watching. "You were wrong on all counts." The leader's voice came out strangled, desperate. "Look, man, Mr. Marquez, we didn't know who she was. If you'd known," Matteo interrupted softly, "you would have done it to someone else, someone without protection." He tilted his head slightly. "That's what you're really saying, isn't it?" The man's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Matteo pulled out a chair from their booth and sat down slowly, gesturing to the seats across from him. "Sit." The three men exchanged glances. The stocky one was sweating. The lanky one looked ready to bolt. But the leader, realizing running would only make things worse, sat back down. His friends followed reluctantly, moving like men walking to their own execution. The diner remained silent. Every customer was a witness now, watching this quiet trial unfold. Matteo leaned back, his posture relaxed, almost casual. "Tell me something. When you walked in here tonight, what did you see?" The leader swallowed hard. I don't understand." "Simple question. What did you see when you looked at her?" Matteo nodded toward Lena. The man's eyes darted to Lena, then quickly away. "I saw a waitress." "What else?" Silence. "Come on," Matteo said, his voice still eerily calm. "You saw something else, something that made you think you could do what you did." "What was it?" The lanky one whispered. "We thought she looked soft." "Soft," Matteo repeated, as if tasting the word. "You mean weak." The man didn't deny it. Matteo's fingers drummed once on the table, a small sound that made all three men flinch. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at her. I see a woman who lost everything 3 years ago, who grieved so deeply she couldn't eat for weeks, who could have stayed broken but chose to rebuild." His voice never rose, never hardened, but the weight of each word pressed down on the booth like a physical force. "I see someone stronger than any of you will ever be." The elderly woman in booth 3 dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. The trucker stood near the counter now, arms crossed, his expression grim and satisfied. The leader tried again. "We're sorry. We're really sorry. We'll pay for her uniform, we'll pay for everything." "You think this is about money?" For the first time, Matteo's voice carried an edge. "You humiliated her, in front of her customers, in the place she's built into a home. You think dollars fix that? Then what do you want?" The stocky one's voice cracked. "We'll do whatever you want. Just, please." Matteo was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to look at Lena, still standing by the counter, her arms wrapped around herself. "What do you want, Lena?" Every eye in the diner turned to her. Lena was quiet, her face unreadable. She looked at the three men now reduced from predators to prey, their earlier cruelty replaced by naked fear. She could see it in their eyes. They expected violence, expected Matteo to break bones, to make them disappear, to do all the things the Black Lion was rumored to do. But she'd never loved Matteo for his capacity for violence. She'd loved him for knowing when not to use it. "I want them to understand," she said finally, her voice steady despite everything. "I want them to understand what they took from me, what they take from every person they treat like this." Matteo nodded slowly, then turned back to the men. "Did you hear that?" The leader nodded frantically. Yes, we understand." "No, you don't." Matteo leaned forward. "But you will. He snapped his fingers once. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. 2 men rose from the back booth, a booth so far in the corner that most customers had forgotten anyone was sitting there. They'd been there the entire time, silent, watching, waiting. One was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and a suit that spoke of quiet wealth. The other was younger, built like a boxer, with calm eyes that had seen too much. They moved with the coordinated precision of men who'd worked together for years. The 3 thugs' faces went from pale to ashen. "No," the leader whispered. "No, please." "Relax," Mateo said, though his tone suggested anything but relaxation. "They're not going to hurt you. They're going to escort you outside, and then we're going to have a conversation about accountability." The stocky one started to cry. Actual tears streamed down his face. "I have a family. I have kids." "Then you should have thought about that before you terrorized someone else's wife." Mateo stood, brushing off his jacket. "Take them to the cars." The 2 men approached the booth. The younger one gestured politely toward the door. "Gentlemen, let's go." The lanky one bolted, pure panic overriding logic. He made it 3 steps before the older man simply stepped into his path. The younger one caught his arm, not roughly, just firmly. "Easy. Running makes it worse." The 3 were escorted toward the door, stumbling over each other. As they passed Lena, the leader turned back, his face desperate. "Please tell him we're sorry. Tell him." Lena's voice stopped him cold. "I'm not the one you should be begging." The door chimed as they were led outside. Through the windows, customers could see 2 black sedans idling at the curb, their engines purring softly in the growing darkness. Mateo walked back to the counter and sat down beside Lena. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand. "I'm sorry you had to be reminded," he said quietly. She squeezed his hand. "Of what we left behind, of why we had to leave." Outside, car doors closed. The sedans pulled away, taillights disappearing down Route 9. Inside Miller's diner, slowly, carefully, life began to resume. The waitress from the evening shift, Maria, a college student who worked weekends, emerged from the kitchen with a borrowed cardigan. She approached Lena hesitantly, her eyes red-rimmed. "Here," she whispered, holding it out. "I keep it in my locker." Lena took it gratefully, slipping it over her torn uniform. "Thank you, Maria." "No," the girl said, her voice shaking. "Thank you. For not running, for staying calm. I would have fallen apart." After Maria returned to the kitchen, Mateo remained at the counter. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He simply sat there, hands folded, breathing slowly. Old Jimmy brought him a cup of coffee without being asked, black. No sugar, the way Mateo always took it. "On the house," Jimmy said gruffly, his weathered hand trembling slightly as he set down the mug. Mateo nodded his thanks. Then he did something unexpected. He turned on the stool to face the diner, all the customers who'd witnessed everything, who sat frozen between fear and fascination. "I apologize," he said, his voice carrying clearly but without force, "for bringing this to your evening, for disrupting your peace." The elderly woman in booth 3 spoke up, her voice wavering but firm. "Young man, you have nothing to apologize for. Those animals," she couldn't finish, overcome with emotion. Her husband patted her hand. The trucker stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the light from the window. "Mr. Marquez," he said carefully, respectfully. "I drove routes through the east side for 15 years, saw what you did for the neighborhoods, how you kept the real predators out." He glanced toward where the 3 men had been sitting. "Men like that? They're everywhere now. Nobody keeps them in check anymore." Mateo's expression didn't change. "That's not my world anymore." "Maybe," the trucker said, "but some things don't change. A man protects what's his. That's universal." Mateo took a sip of his coffee, then set it down with deliberate care. When he spoke again, his words were measured, each one chosen with precision. "I want to tell you all something. About dignity, about consequences, about what men who prey on the weak actually fear." The diner was silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to quiet. "Those 3 men out there, they'll be driven to a place where they'll sit across from people far more frightening than me. People who've lost daughters to men like them. Mothers who've buried sons because someone thought cruelty was power." Mateo's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. "They won't be beaten. They won't be killed. They'll be shown something worse." "What's worse than that?" Maria whispered from the kitchen doorway. Mateo looked at her. Empathy. Forced, unavoidable empathy. They'll hear stories, see photographs, meet the people whose lives were destroyed by casual cruelty, and then they'll be given a choice. Lena spoke for the first time since sitting down. Mateo. He turned to her, and his expression softened the hardness, melting away to reveal something vulnerable underneath. I know what you're thinking, that this is me falling back, that I'm breaking our promise. Are you? No. His hand found hers again. Because this isn't about power, Lena. It's about making sure they understand, really understand. What they did to you, they've done to others. What they would have done to the next person, and the next. He looked back at the diner customers. Men like that don't stop because someone yells at them. They stop when they finally see themselves clearly. The elderly man spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. What happens after? After they see themselves? They'll be given an opportunity, Mateo said, to work, to serve, to protect the kinds of people they used to victimize. Not because I'm forcing them at gunpoint, but because they'll finally understand why they should. He paused. Some will take it. Some won't. The ones who won't. He didn't finish the sentence. The trucker nodded slowly. Justice, not vengeance. Something like that. Jimmy emerged fully from the kitchen, his apron stained with grease, his face carved with decades of hard living. You know what I see when I look around this diner? I see people who were too scared to move, including me. He shook his head, shame coloring his features. I should have done something the moment they started harassing her. We all should have. You're not trained for that, Lena said gently. None of you are. Doesn't matter, the elderly woman said firmly. We sat there. We watched. We let it happen. Mateo stood, turning to address them all directly. You want to know what would actually help? Next time, and there will be a next time, somewhere. To someone, don't just watch. Call someone. Stand up. Even if it's just saying stop. Because silence? He looked at each face. Silence is what men like that count on. They don't fear strength. They fear witnesses. They fear community. The trucker pulled out his phone. I got their license plate, before your guys took them. Took a picture of their faces, too. Good man, Mateo said. Should have done more. You did what mattered. You saw. You remembered. Mateo sat back down, suddenly looking tired. That's more than most. Lena leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, careful of her torn uniform, protective without being possessive. Outside, the sun had fully set. Route 9 stretched dark and empty. Inside Miller's diner, beneath the warm lights, something had shifted. The customers weren't just witnesses anymore. They were part of something, a moment that would define how they saw themselves. The trucker was the first to sit back down, then the elderly couple, then the others, one by one, returning to their meals, but everything had changed. Mateo finished his coffee in silence, the mug resting between his hands like an anchor. Lena sat beside him, her shoulder pressed against his, drawing strength from his presence. The diner had returned to a semblance of normalcy, forks scraping plates, low murmurs of conversation, but the air still hummed with tension. Jimmy approached with the coffee pot. Refill? Mateo shook his head. No, thank you. He glanced at the clock above the register. 20 minutes had passed since the black sedans pulled away. He stood slowly, helping Lena to her feet. I need to go handle this. Lena's hand tightened around his. Mateo, wait. He turned to her fully, his dark eyes searching her face. The rest of the diner faded away. It was just the two of them, the way it had always been in the important moments. What are you going to do to them? Her voice was barely above a whisper. What needs to be done? That's not an answer. Her hazel eyes held his, unflinching. We made a promise. No violence, no going back to that life. They hurt you, Lena. They humiliated me, she corrected. There's a difference. And yes, it was terrifying. And yes, I wanted to disappear in that moment, but I didn't break. I'm still standing here. She touched his chest, feeling his heartbeat. We're still standing here. Mateo's jaw tightened. So what do you want me to do? Let them walk away? Wait until they do this to someone else's wife? Someone else's daughter? No. Her voice was firm now. I want you to do what you said you'd do. Show them empathy. Show them consequences. But I want to be part of that choice. He studied her face, confusion flickering across his features. What choice? Lena took a breath, gathering her thoughts. She'd spent 3 years trying to forget the woman she used to be, the one who sat across from broken teenagers in a community center, who believed people could change if given the right tools. That woman felt like a stranger now, but maybe she'd never really left. I want to talk to them, she said. Absolutely not. Mateo's response was immediate, protective. Lena, you don't need to. Yes, I do. She gripped his hand tighter. Not for them. For me. Because if I don't face them, if I just let you handle it, then they took something from me tonight that I can't get back. What? My voice. She looked around the diner at the customers who'd watched her be victimized, who'd seen her reduced to someone needing rescue. Everyone in this room saw me as a victim tonight. Even you. Especially you. Mateo flinched as if she'd struck him. That's not... It is, though. Her tone was gentle but unwavering. The moment you walked in, you took over. You handled it. You made decisions. And I'm grateful, God, Mateo. I'm so grateful you were here. But if this ends with you punishing them while I stay silent, she shook her head, then nothing changes. I'm still just the woman something happened to, not the woman who decides what happens next. The diner had gone quiet again. Everyone was listening, though they pretended not to. Jimmy spoke from behind the counter. She's right, son. Mateo turned, surprised. The old cook shrugged, his weathered face thoughtful. I've seen men handle things their whole lives. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back and let the person who was hurt decide the path forward. The elderly woman stood from her booth, her small frame suddenly commanding attention. Young man, your wife is a remarkable woman. I've been coming to this diner for 2 years, and I've watched her handle drunk truckers, angry teenagers, and impossible customers with more grace than I've seen in a lifetime. She walked closer, her cane tapping softly. Don't take this moment from her. She's earned it. Mateo looked at Lena, conflict warring across his face. She could see the battle inside him, the instinct to protect, clashing with his respect for her autonomy. It was the same battle he'd fought when they first met, when she'd insisted on walking through dangerous neighborhoods alone to reach the kids who needed her most. Finally, he exhaled. What do you want to say to them? I don't know yet, Lena admitted. But I need to look them in the eye. I need them to hear my voice, not yours. To understand that I'm not weak because I'm kind. That gentleness isn't the same as helplessness. Mateo was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Marco? Don't start yet. Bring them back to the diner. A pause. Yes, back here. My wife wants to speak with them. Another pause. No, that's not negotiable. Bring them back. He ended the call and looked at Lena. They'll be here in 5 minutes. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. If they say one word that crosses a line, then I'll handle it, she said. Trust me, the way I've always trusted you. His eyes closed briefly, as if in pain. When they opened again, they were filled with something that looked like awe. You're the strongest person I've ever known, then let me prove it. Outside, headlights appeared in the darkness. The black sedans were returning. Lena straightened her borrowed cardigan, lifted her chin, and turned toward the door. The bell chimed as the 3 men were escorted back inside, pale, terrified, and about to face something far more powerful than the Black Lion's fury. They were about to face the woman they'd underestimated. The 3 men stumbled back through the diner door, flanked by Mateo's 2 associates. The leader's eyes were red-rimmed, his earlier arrogance completely shattered. The stocky one had stopped crying, but his face remained blotchy and swollen. The lanky one kept his head down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. They looked like different men than the ones who'd walked in an hour ago. Marco, the older man with silver hair, nodded to Mateo. As requested. Wait outside, Mateo said quietly. But stay close. Marco's eyes flicked to Lena, concern evident in his weathered face. He'd known her in the old life, had been at their wedding, had helped them disappear when Mateo returned from the dead. You sure about this, Mrs. Marquez? I'm sure. He nodded once, respect in that small gesture, and stepped outside with his partner. Through the window, the sedans remained idling, their engines a low purr in the night. Lena stood in the center of the diner, the torn uniform hidden beneath Maria's cardigan. The 3 men were positioned near the door, escape impossible, dignity stripped away. Every customer watched witnesses again, but this time to something different. The leader couldn't stay silent. Look, we're sorry, we're really… Stop. Lena's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his pleading like a blade. He fell silent immediately. I didn't ask you to speak yet. The stocky one shifted his weight, uncomfortable. The lanky one wrapped his arms around himself, making himself smaller. Lena took a step closer. Mateo remained by the counter, every muscle tense, but he didn't move. This was hers. Do you know what it feels like? She began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. To have your dignity stripped away in front of strangers? To feel fabric tear and know that everyone is watching you be reduced to an object? The leader opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. No, you don't. Because men like you, you're the ones who do the taking. You've never had something precious stolen from you in front of a crowd. She looked at each of them in turn. But here's what you need to understand. What you took from me tonight. You didn't take my strength. You didn't take my voice. You took my peace. You took the safety I built in this place over 3 years. The elderly woman in booth 3 wiped her eyes. Jimmy stood motionless behind the counter, his jaw tight. This diner, Lena continued, gesturing to the space around them, was my sanctuary, a place where I smiled because I meant it, where I poured coffee and remembered names and felt like I'd finally found something good after… She paused, collecting herself. After everything I'd lost, and you walked in here and shattered that. Not just for me, for everyone here. The trucker nodded slowly, his massive arms still crossed. So now I'm going to give you something you didn't give me, Lena said. A choice. The leader's head snapped up, hope flickering across his face. A choice? My husband has connections, resources, people who owe him favors from a life he left behind. She glanced at Mateo, who remained still as stone. He could make you disappear. Not kill you, he's not that man anymore. But he could make your lives so difficult that you'd wish he had. You'd lose jobs, housing, any chance at normal lives. You'd spend years looking over your shoulders. The 3 men exchanged terrified glances. Or, Lena continued, you can choose something harder. What? The stocky one whispered. Redemption. The word hung in the air. You'll work. Real work. Not some easy community service where you pick up trash for a few weekends and forget about it. You'll be placed with families. My husband still protects families who've lost people to violence, to cruelty, to men exactly like you. You'll serve them, protect them, learn their stories until you see yourselves clearly. The lanky one's voice cracked. For how long? Until you change. Lena's voice was iron now. Until the people you hurt, and there have been others, haven't there? The leader looked away. That was answer enough. Until those instincts are gone, Lena finished. Until you understand in your bones why what you did tonight was unforgivable. And if you can't change, she let the question hang. Then you'll have chosen the harder path for nothing. And if we refuse both? The leader's voice was small, defeated. Mateo spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but absolute. Then we go back to the original plan. And you won't get another choice. The stocky one dropped to his knees, hands clasped. Please, I'll do it. Whatever you want. I'll work. I'll change, I swear. Don't swear to me, Lena said sharply. Swear to yourself, to the person you could become if you actually tried. The elderly woman stood slowly, leaning on her cane. She approached the 3 men with surprising steadiness. When she reached the leader, she looked up at him with eyes that had seen 8 decades of human nature. My grandson, she said quietly, was beaten outside a bar by men like you, 3 against 1. They laughed while they did it. He survived, but he's never been the same. Her voice didn't waver. So, when this woman offers you redemption, you take it. You take it, and you earn it. Because mercy like this doesn't come twice. She turned and walked back to her booth, the tap of her cane punctuating each word. The leader looked at Lena, tears streaming down his face now. Why? Why would you give us this chance? Lena's answer was simple. Because someone once gave my husband a chance to be more than what the world expected. And he took it. She glanced at Mateo, love and pain mingling in her expression. I'm hoping you're smart enough to do the same. Marco opened the door, stepping back inside. Decision time, gentlemen. The cars are waiting either way. The 3 men looked at each other. Then, one by one, they nodded. We'll do it, the leader said. The work, the families, all of it. Marco's expression remained neutral. Then let's go. You've got a long night ahead of you. As they were escorted out, the leader paused at the door, looking back at Lena one final time. Thank you, he whispered. Lena didn't respond. She simply watched as they climbed into the sedans, the doors closing with final, heavy clicks. The cars pulled away, taillights disappearing into darkness, and Lena finally allowed herself to breathe. 3 weeks later, Lena stood at the diner counter folding napkins when her phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Asterisk. Thought you'd want to know they're still showing up. Asterisk. She glanced at Matteo, who sat in his usual spot by the window, reading the morning paper. He felt her gaze and looked up, one eyebrow raised in question. They're following through, she said quietly. Something like relief crossed his face. Good. But Lena wondered, were they really changing? Or just going through the motions, terrified of the alternative? She wouldn't have to wonder long. The rehabilitation Marco had designed was not gentle. The 3 men had been separated, each placed with different families connected to Matteo's old network, families who'd suffered losses that men like them had caused. The leader, whose name was Derek, had been assigned to the Castellano family, Mrs. Castellano was a widow whose husband had been killed in a bar fight 3 years ago, beaten to death by 4 men who'd decided he'd looked at them wrong. She had 2 teenage sons now, growing up without a father. Derek's job was simple on paper: help with whatever the family needed, fix things, drive the boys to school, grocery shopping, yard work. But the reality was far more complicated. The first morning, Derek had arrived at the small house in Queens at 6 a.m., as instructed. Mrs. Castellano had opened the door, looked him up and down with eyes that held no warmth, and said simply, "You're late. The boys need to be at school by 7:30. You're driving." "I'm 5 minutes early," Derek had started. "Early is on time is late. Late is unacceptable." She'd handed him car keys. "Prove you're not like the others." The boys, Marco Jr., 16, and Tommy, 13, had stared at Derek with open hostility as they climbed into the car. The drive was silent, except for Tommy's muttered directions. At a red light, Marco Jr. had spoken. "You know why you're here?" Derek had gripped the steering wheel. "Yeah. My dad died because guys like you thought violence was funny, thought being cruel made you strong." The teenager's voice was cold, controlled. "So don't expect us to like you. Don't expect forgiveness. Just do the work and stay out of our way." Derek had nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. That had been week 1. By week 3, things had shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. Derek had fixed the porch railing Mrs. Castellano's husband had been meaning to repair before he died. He hadn't asked. He'd just noticed it was loose and bought materials with his own money from the construction job Marco had arranged for him. Mrs. Castellano had said nothing, but that evening, she'd left a plate of food on the porch for him. Still no invitation inside, but it was something. Tommy had left his backpack at school one day. Derek had driven back to get it without being asked, waiting 40 minutes in the parking lot until the janitor let him in. When he'd returned it, Tommy had mumbled something that might have been, "Thanks." Marco Jr. had been harder. He watched Derek like a hawk, looking for any sign of the cruelty Derek had shown in the diner, any hint that this was an act. One evening, Derek was leaving after helping move furniture, and he'd overheard Mrs. Castellano talking to her sons in the kitchen. "He's trying, Mama," Tommy had said. "I know he's one of them, but trying isn't enough," Marco Jr. had interrupted. "Dad tried every day. He tried to be good, to provide for us, and those animals killed him anyway. Why should this guy get a second chance Dad never got?" There had been silence. Then Mrs. Castellano's voice, thick with emotion. "Because your father would want him to have it. Your father believed people could change. That's why I loved him." Derek had stood frozen on the porch, his hand on the railing he'd repaired, and for the first time in his adult life, he'd cried. The stocky one, Ryan, had been placed with an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had been assaulted outside a subway station. The daughter had survived but couldn't leave her apartment anymore without panic attacks. Ryan's job was to escort her to therapy appointments, to the grocery store, anywhere she needed to go, to be the safe presence she'd lost faith in. The first week, she couldn't even look at him. She'd sit in the passenger seat, trembling, tears streaming silently down her face. Ryan had started talking. Not to her, to himself, really, apologizing to the air. "I never understood. I never thought about what happened after guys like me, after we." By week 2, she'd asked him a question. "Why did you do it? To that waitress?" Ryan had struggled to answer. "I thought it was funny. I thought she was. Nobody. I didn't see her as real. And now? Now I can't stop seeing her. Seeing you. Seeing everyone I've—" He'd gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. "I don't know how to fix it." "You can't," she'd said quietly. "But you can stop being the reason someone else breaks." The lanky one, Kurt, had been assigned to a community center in the Bronx, the same kind of center where Lena had once worked. He taught basic skills to at-risk kids, supervised basketball games, cleaned up graffiti. A social worker there, a woman named Diana, watched him carefully. One day she'd asked, "Why are you really here?" Kurt had told her everything. The diner, the torn uniform, the choice Lena had given them. Diana had listened without interrupting. Then she'd said, "Those kids in there? Half of them have fathers like you used to be. Absent, violent, cruel. The other half have no fathers at all." She'd pointed toward the gym where children's laughter echoed. "You want redemption? Become what they needed and never had." That had been 2 weeks ago. Now, Kurt stayed late every night, helping with homework, teaching kids to shoot free throws, listening to problems he had no idea how to solve. It was exhausting. It was humbling. It was changing him. Back at the diner, Lena set down her phone and looked at Mateo. "Do you think it's working?" "I think," Mateo said carefully, "that we'll know in time. Real change doesn't happen in weeks. It takes months, years, maybe. And if they fail, then we tried. That's more than most would do." 6 weeks after that night, the diner door chimed during the late afternoon lull. Lena was refilling salt shakers when she looked up and froze. Derek stood in the doorway, alone. He looked different, thinner, his face gaunt with exhaustion, his eyes hollowed out by something that looked like sleeplessness or guilt or both. His hands trembled at his sides. Every muscle in Lena's body tensed. Behind the counter, Jimmy straightened, his hand moving toward the phone. At his corner booth, Mateo had already risen, his chair scraping against the floor. "It's okay," Lena said, her voice surprisingly steady. She set down the salt shaker carefully. "It's okay. It's okay." "Lena," Mateo began. "It's okay," she repeated, meeting his eyes. After a moment, he nodded, but he didn't sit back down. He stayed standing, watchful, ready. Derek took a hesitant step inside. "I'm sorry," Marco said. "He said I wasn't supposed to come here, that I should stay away. But I—" His voice cracked. "I needed to. I couldn't." "Sit," Lena said, gesturing to the nearest booth. He sat quickly, gratefully, like a man whose legs could no longer support him. Lena slid into the seat across from him, maintaining careful distance. Up close, she could see the changes more clearly. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by something raw and broken. "Mrs. Marquez," he started, then stopped. "Can I call you that? Or should I?" "Lena is fine." He nodded, his hands folding and unfolding on the table. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I know Marco will be pissed when he finds out. But I can't do this anymore without saying something to you. To your face. Not texting. Not through someone else." Lena waited. She'd learned long ago that silence was often the best invitation for truth. Derek's eyes were wet. "I've been working with Mrs. Castellano and her sons for 6 weeks now. Every morning, I drive those boys to school. Every evening, I help with whatever needs fixing. And every single day, Mrs. Castellano shows me pictures." His voice broke. Pictures of her husband, at their wedding, holding the boys when they were babies, teaching Marco Jr. to ride a bike, just living, being a dad. His hands were shaking harder now. "She doesn't say anything when she shows me. She just sets them on the table while we have coffee. She finally let me inside the house last week and she lets me look. And every picture is like a knife because I know men like me took that from them." Tears spilled down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. The other night, Tommy, he's 13, he came home from school crying. Some kids were bullying him, pushing him around because he doesn't have a dad to stick up for him. Derek's breath hitched. And Marco Jr., he was so angry, so hurt. And I sat there thinking, this is what I do. This is the world I help create. Places where kids like Tommy get hurt because men like me think cruelty is strength. Lena's own eyes burned, but she kept her composure. I've spent 6 weeks trying to be useful, trying to prove I'm not the same person who walked into this diner and—" He couldn't finish. "But the truth is, Mrs. Marquez, Lena, I don't know if I can change enough. I don't know if 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years will ever be enough to undo who I was." "Then why are you here?" Lena asked quietly. "Because I need you to know something." Derek leaned forward, his voice desperate. "What I did to you wasn't about you. It was never about you. You were kind, professional, doing your job, and I—" He pressed his palms against his eyes. "I saw that kindness, and I wanted to destroy it. Because kindness made me feel small, made me feel like I was nothing. So I tried to make you nothing instead." The diner was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Derek's ragged breathing. "And now," he continued, "every time Mrs. Castellano is kind to me, makes me dinner, asks about my day, I feel that same smallness. Except now I understand what it really means. It means I'm being shown something I don't deserve, something I need to earn." He looked up at Lena, his face completely vulnerable. "I can't ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I needed you to hear me say it out loud, to your face. I'm sorry, not because your husband scared me, not because I'm being forced to work, but because I finally understand what I took from you. And I'm going to spend however long it takes making sure I never take that from anyone else again." Lena sat with his words, feeling their weight. Part of her wanted to tell him he was forgiven, to ease the obvious pain he was in. But she'd learned that forgiveness given too easily was often meaningless. "Derek," she said finally, "do you know what the hardest part of that night was for me?" He shook his head. "It wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't even the fear." She met his eyes directly. "It was wondering if I'd ever feel safe here again. If you'd taken this place from me forever." His face crumpled. "But here's what I've learned," Lena continued. "Safety isn't something someone can give you or take from you. It's something you build, something you choose." She took a slow breath. "I choose to feel safe in my own diner. I choose not to let what you did define this place. That's more than I deserve." "Probably," Lena agreed. "But that's not about you. That's about me refusing to let you have power over my life." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "What you're doing with the Castellanos, that's good. That's important. But you're not doing it for me, Derek. You're doing it for yourself. To become someone who doesn't need to hurt others to feel strong." He nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. "So here's what I'll say," Lena said. "I hear your apology. I recognize your remorse. And I genuinely hope that you become the person you're trying to be. But forgiveness?" She shook her head gently. "That's something you'll have to earn. Not from me, from yourself." Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood slowly. "Thank you. For listening. For not throwing me out." "Derek," Lena called as he turned toward the door. He looked back. "The fact that you came here, that you faced me, that took courage. Don't waste it." He nodded once, then left. The bell chimed as the door closed behind him. Mateo crossed to her booth and slid in where Derek had been sitting. "You okay?" "Yeah." Lena realized she was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Yeah, I think I am." He reached across and took her hand. "You gave him something important today." "What?" "Truth. No false comfort. No easy absolution. Just truth." Mateo squeezed her fingers. "That's the only thing that actually changes people." Outside, Derek stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back at the diner. Then he pulled out his phone and texted Marco. Asterisk. "I went to see her. I know I wasn't supposed to. I'll accept whatever consequences come." Asterisk. Marco's response was immediate. Asterisk. "Mrs. Castellano already called me. Said you can stay. Said you're finally starting to get it." Asterisk. Derek stared at his phone, then looked up at the darkening sky. For the first time in 6 weeks, something that felt almost like hope flickered in his chest. That night, after the diner closed, Lena and Mateo sat in the dimmed dining room. The chairs were stacked on tables, the floors mopped, the smell of cleaning solution mixing with the lingering scent of coffee. Through the windows, Route 9 stretched empty and dark, occasional headlights passing like distant memories. Mateo sat at the counter, while Lena stood behind it, a reversal of their usual positions. She poured them both coffee, even though it was nearly midnight. Some conversations required the ritual. "You've been quiet since he left," Mateo said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. Lena leaned against the back counter, her borrowed cardigan she'd kept Maria's, unable to wear her old uniform anymore, wrapped tight around her. "I've been thinking. About whether I did the right thing. Giving them that choice." She stared into her coffee. "What if they don't change? What if Derek was just putting on a show today, saying what he thought I wanted to hear? Then he'll fail, and he'll face the consequences we outlined." Mateo's voice was matter of fact, but not unkind. "But what if someone gets hurt while we're waiting to find out?" The question had been haunting her for weeks. What if they hurt someone else because I was too soft, too naive, too— "Lena, stop." Mateo set down his mug and came around the counter to stand beside her. "You weren't soft. You were strong enough to offer something I never could have." "What's that?" "Hope." He turned her gently to face him. "I would have broken them, Lena. Not physically, I meant what I said about leaving that life behind. But I would have crushed them so completely they'd never have thought about hurting anyone again. Out of fear, not growth. And that would have been wrong?" "No," he said carefully. "But it wouldn't have been you. And you're the one who had to live with the choice." His thumbs traced circles on her shoulders. "The moment I walked through that door, I wanted blood. I wanted them to suffer the way you suffered, but you stopped me. You asked for something harder than vengeance." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I was terrified that night. When he tore my uniform, when everyone was watching, I felt so small. And then you walked in, and I felt safe again. Protected." She pressed her hand against his chest. "But I also felt like I'd lost something, like I'd become someone who needed rescuing." "You never needed rescuing," Mateo said fiercely. "You needed backup. There's a difference." "Is there?" Her voice cracked. "Because I've spent 3 years building this life, this version of myself who's gentle and kind and believes in second chances. And in 30 seconds, 3 strangers made me doubt all of it. Made me wonder if kindness is just weakness wearing a better mask." Mateo cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. What happened that night, what they did, that wasn't a failure of your kindness. It was a failure of theirs, of their humanity. You didn't invite that by being gentle. They chose cruelty because they're broken. But, no." His voice was firm but tender. "You want to know what I saw when I walked through that door? I saw you standing there, clutching your torn uniform, and you weren't screaming or crying or falling apart. You were calm, steady, like you were waiting for something." He paused. "You were waiting for me to walk in, weren't you?" Lena nodded slowly. "I knew you were on your way. You always come by around that time, after your walk. I just had to. Hold on until you got here. That's not weakness, Lena. That's trust. That's knowing you're not alone." His forehead touched hers. "And what you did after giving them a choice, facing Derek today, that took more courage than anything I did." She let herself lean into him, drawing strength from his solidity. "I keep thinking about Mrs. Castellano, about how she lost her husband to men like Derek. And here I am, alive, safe, with you beside me. What right do I have to offer mercy when she's living with permanent loss?" "Maybe," Mateo said quietly. "That's exactly why you can offer it. Because you know how precious it is not to lose someone. Because you know what it means to get a second chance when the world said you were done." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "I was supposed to be dead, Lena. Everyone believed it. And you could have stayed in that grief, let it consume you. But you didn't. You chose to believe I could come back, that we could start over. That was different." "Was it?" He brushed a tear from her cheek. "You gave me a chance to be more than the Black Lion, to be just Mateo, a man who drinks coffee and fixes leaky faucets and loves his wife. You saw something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." Lena was crying openly now. "I was so scared I'd lost you. Those 8 months, God. Mateo, I wanted to die. Every morning felt impossible. And then you came back, broken and scarred, and I realized losing you would have been easier than watching you die slowly from guilt and rage. But you didn't let me," he said. "You made me promise. No violence, no going back, just peace." He smiled sadly. "Even though peace is harder than war ever was." "Is it?" Lena asked. "Harder?" "Much harder. Because war has clear rules, clear enemies. Peace requires you to sit with uncertainty, to trust, to forgive yourself most of all." He kissed her forehead. "I've spent 3 years learning how to be a man who doesn't solve problems with fear, Some days I'm good at it. Some days like that night I want to go back to what I knew. But you didn't. Because of you." His voice was raw with emotion. "Because you asked me to trust that your way, mercy, accountability, redemption might actually work. Even when every instinct I had screamed for vengeance." They stood together in the quiet diner, holding each other like anchors in a storm that had passed but left its marks behind. "Do you regret it?" Lena finally asked. "Leaving that life? Sometimes I wonder if you miss the power, the respect, the certainty of it." Mateo was quiet for a long moment. "I miss the simplicity," he admitted. "I miss knowing exactly who I was and what I stood for. But I don't miss the man I was becoming. Hard, cold, suspicious of everyone." He looked around the diner at the red vinyl booths, the counter where regulars sat, the windows that let in morning light. "This place? It's taught me more about strength than 20 years in that world ever did." "How?" "Because strength isn't about who you can hurt or control. It's about what you protect, what you build, what you refuse to lose even when the world tries to take it." He smiled at her, genuine and warm. "You've always known that. I'm just finally catching up." Lena set down her coffee and wrapped her arms around him fully, pressing her face into his chest. His heartbeat was steady, familiar, home. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." He held her tighter. "And I'm sorry you had to go through that. Sorry I wasn't there 5 minutes earlier. You were there exactly when I needed you." She pulled back to look at him. "But I'm glad I had those 5 minutes alone, to remember who I am, to remember that I'm not fragile just because I'm kind." "You've never been fragile," Mateo said. "You're the strongest person I know." Outside, a truck rumbled past on Route 9. Inside Miller's diner, two people who'd chosen peace over power stood together in the darkness, rebuilding what cruelty had tried to break. And for the first time since that night, Lena felt something she'd been afraid she'd lost forever. She felt whole. 3 months later, autumn had settled fully over Route 9. The maple trees lining the highway blazed orange and gold, and the morning air carried the crisp promise of winter. Inside Miller's diner, the coffee was hot, the griddle sizzled with hash browns, and life had found its rhythm again. Lena moved between tables with the same gentle grace she'd always had, but something had changed. The regulars saw it, a quiet steel beneath the kindness, a confidence that hadn't been there before. She still remembered orders, still smiled warmly, still made everyone feel seen. But now, when she walked through the diner, people felt her presence differently. She was still gentle, but no one would ever mistake gentle for weak again. The bell chimed at 7:30, and the morning breakfast crowd glanced up reflexively, a habit formed 3 months ago that hadn't faded. But it was just old Mr. Patterson, who came every Tuesday for biscuits and gravy. "Morning, Lena," he called, hanging his jacket on the hook by his usual booth. "Morning, Mr. Patterson. The usual?" "You know it." At the corner booth by the window, Mateo sat with his newspaper and black coffee, the same spot he'd claimed every morning since that night. He never mentioned it, but Lena knew why he sat there. From that angle, he could see the entire diner, the door, and Lena wherever she moved. Old habits died hard, even for men trying to leave violence behind, but she didn't mind. His presence was a comfort, not a cage. Jimmy called from the kitchen. "Order up, table 5. Maria, who'd been promoted to full-time after proving herself that difficult night, grabbed the plates with practiced efficiency. She'd become fiercely protective of Lena, watching male customers with suspicious eyes, quick to intervene if anyone's tone shifted wrong. "Maria," Lena had told her gently last week, "you don't have to guard me." "I know," the young woman had replied, "but I want to. You taught me something that night." "What's that?" "That standing your ground doesn't mean standing alone." Now, as the morning rush settled into its comfortable rhythm, the bell chimed again. This time, Lena's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Derek walked in, followed by Ryan and Kurt. All 3 men stopped just inside the door, uncertain, waiting. The diner went quiet. Jimmy appeared in the kitchen window. Mateo's newspaper lowered slowly. Mr. Patterson's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Lena set down the coffee pot and walked toward them, her heart steady despite its quickened pace. Derek spoke first, his voice low and respectful. "Mrs. Marquez, we know we shouldn't just show up," but Marco said. "He said if we wanted to, we could ask. Permission, I mean, to come back. Not as," he struggled for words, "not as who we were, but as customers?" Lena finished gently. All three nodded. She studied them. They looked different than they had 3 months ago. Derek had lost the aggressive swagger. His shoulders carried humility now instead of arrogance. Ryan's eyes no longer held that mean glint, replaced by something softer, sadder, wiser. Kurt stood quieter, smaller, like a man who'd learned the value of taking up less space. "Mrs. Chen," Ryan said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "The woman I've been helping, she asked me to eat dinner with her family last week. At the table. Not on the porch or in the car. At the table." His eyes were wet. "She said I'd earned it." Kurt added quickly, "The kids at the center, they don't know why I'm really there. They just know I show up. Every day. And last week, one of them, this kid named Marcus, who never talks, he asked me if I'd come to his basketball game. Not because he had to, because he wanted me there." Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Castellano's son, Marco Jr. He's been teaching me about his dad, showing me pictures, telling me stories. And yesterday," he said. Derek's breath caught. He said his dad would have liked that the porch got fixed, that he would have appreciated someone taking care of his family. Lena felt tears prick her eyes but kept her composure. Behind her, she heard Mateo's chair scrape not in threat, but in attention. "You've been working for 3 months, Lena said. "That's good. That's important. But change isn't about time. It's about who you become when no one's watching." "We know," Derek said. "And we're not fixed. I don't think we ever will be. But we're trying, every day, and we wanted." He looked at his companions, then back to Lena. "We wanted you to know that what you gave us that choice, it saved our lives. Not from your husband, from ourselves." The diner remained silent, every customer a witness again, but this time, to something different, to accountability, to transformation, to the hard, ugly work of redemption. Lena took a slow breath. "There are rules if you want to come here." All three straightened, listening. "You treat every person in this diner with respect. Staff, customers, everyone. You tip fairly. You're patient when service is slow. And if I ever see you treat someone the way you treated me, you'll never set foot in here again." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," they said in unison. "And one more thing." Lena's eyes moved between them. "You don't get to feel good about yourselves for showing up here. This isn't about earning my forgiveness or proving something to me. You come here because it's a diner, and diners serve everyone, even people working to be better than they were." Derek's voice was hoarse. "Thank you." Lena nodded once, then gestured to an empty booth in the back, not hidden, but not central either. A place to exist without demanding attention. As the 3 men moved toward it, the elderly woman from booth 3, the one whose grandson had been beaten, stood slowly. She walked to their booth before they could sit, and all 3 froze. She looked at each of them with eyes that had seen too much pain. Then she said simply, "My grandson starts community college next month. He's studying social work. Says he wants to help people who are angry learn to be something else." She paused. "So keep going. Keep doing the work. Because people like him, they need to see that change is possible." Then she returned to her breakfast, leaving the 3 men staring after her in stunned silence. Mateo approached Lena at the counter, speaking low enough that only she could hear. "You sure about this?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm sure about giving people the chance to prove me right or wrong." He smiled a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "That's my girl." The morning continued. Coffee was poured, orders were taken, conversations resumed. The 3 men in the back booth sat quietly, ordered simply, and when they left an hour later, they left a tip that was triple their bill. As the door chimed behind them, Jimmy called from the kitchen. "Think they'll actually make it?" Lena wiped down the counter, her movements practiced and sure. "I don't know, but we gave them the tools. What they build with them is up to them." Mr. Patterson raised his coffee mug in a small salute. "You're a good woman, Lena Marquez." "I'm just a woman who believes people can be better than their worst moments," she replied, "if they're willing to do the work." Mateo returned to his corner booth, his newspaper spread before him, but he wasn't reading. He was watching Lena move through the diner she'd reclaimed not through violence or vengeance, but through the quiet, radical act of choosing mercy without sacrificing strength. Outside, the autumn sun climbed higher over Route 9. Cars passed, trucks rumbled by, the world kept turning. And inside Miller's diner, where cruelty had once torn fabric and dignity, something else was being woven. Something fragile, but real. Peace. Hard-won, carefully tended, fiercely protected. The kind of peace that didn't come from the absence of conflict, but from the presence of people who refused to let cruelty have the final word. Lena caught Mateo's eye across the diner. He raised his coffee mug slightly, a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding. They'd built this together. This sanctuary, this second chance. And no matter what came through that door next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The diner always stayed open, because some places aren't just about food or coffee or shelter from the highway. Some places are about proving that broken things can be mended, that gentle things can be strong, that mercy and justice aren't opposites, they're partners in the slow, difficult work of making the world a little less cruel. And in a small diner on Route 9, two people who'd chosen peace over power poured coffee and flipped pancakes and reminded everyone who walked through that door of a simple truth. Strength isn't about who you can hurt. It's about what you refuse to lose. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.